Welcome to Living Catholic, the weekly podcast, or actually recently not so weekly podcast
Right.
from the Diocese of Birmingham. I'm David Anders, the Director of Education and Lifelong Formation. I'm joined today by Max Gallegos, who's a seminarian for our diocese at the Josephenum. He's entering theology studies, originally from Fort Payne, Our Lady of the Valley. Also, host of his own podcast, Logos Podcast, which is about seminary life and seminary studies. So,
Right.
Max, our podcast is about living the Catholic faith authentically and with joy, with an emphasis on our own Bishop Reiko's call for a year of the parish and the Eucharist, thinking about how we can connect more deeply to the Eucharist into a parish life. So, you're somebody, as a seminarian, that's interesting enough, but with this podcast, you have about seminary life and studies and interests. You've got a listenership around the diocese, and you have an interest in sharing what you're learning. And since this is a podcast about living the Catholic faith in Birmingham, it seemed a good fit to have you on. So welcome to Living Catholic.
Well, thank you for having me, Doctor. So it's going to be awesome. I hope I can answer some questions you have for me, and I hope I represent the seminary in the diocese in a positive manner.
Well, we're just going to have fun and have a great
Let's do it.
conversation.
That's what I'm here for.
Bishop called for your parish and the Eucharist. We're going to get into that, but I
Yeah.
want to start with you tell us about yourself, about your parish life growing up and your vocation to the priesthood.
Okay. How can I put this? So I was born and raised in Fort Payne, Alabama. Right. I come from a family of 7, including my parents. So there's 5 kids. Myself being the oldest. And so, I was born and raised at Fort Payne, Our Lady of the Valley.
Yep.
In Fort Payne, Alabama. So the parish is largely Hispanic. We've had, growing up, there was religious sisters there that helped out. And then we got Father Mark Spreel to help out. And so I had him as my pastor for some time. And then recently Father Rick Chenault,
Yep.
who is there now. And
Okay, so I'm going to stop you right now. I've already got a question for you.
All right.
Okay, so you talk about growing up in a largely Hispanic parish.
Yeah,
I know
right.
you're of Mexican descent.
Yeah.
You're totally bicultural, bilingual, by everything, right? All right. So, what is your perspective coming into the seminary? Right, you know that we need priests who, in our diocese, who can
Right.
minister to the Anglo community, the Hispanic community, and more importantly, who know how to bridge that gap. Right. So, what is somebody who is obviously extremely comfortable interculturally, right?
Right.
What insight do you think you bring to the seminary experience and to our diocese and hopefully to our presbyterate about living that, what is for many people a challenging vocation in the priesthood?
Yeah, so, I was actually talking to some seminarian brothers of mine about this last week. And I think one of the things that I hope to bring to the diocese and to some of the people I encounter is that in the Hispanic culture, the way that we look at the priest and the way we look at just the church in general, we look at it, I've noticed, with a certain level of maybe to a fault even sometimes, but as a very, very authoritarian, very kind of how can I say it, high church. We right. So we respect everything very, very highly in the church, and I think that one of the things that I've learned from the Hispanic community is particularly how we, as I'm a first generation Hispanic, right? So my parents came here from Mexico.
Yeah.
And I was born in the U.S. So one of the things that I hope to do is to be able to kind of bring the American culture and the Mexican culture together, because I've had that experience of being immersed in a fully Hispanic culture and also being immersed in a fully American culture.
Okay, so what does that look
And
like,
so-
bringing those cultures together in the context of the church?
Well, I think one of the ways we could do that is simply for first generations, especially young professionals maybe, to feel connected to a community at the church. To feel that if they need a job, they can reach out to certain parishioners that can provide these jobs, or simply to go over to different houses, of parishioners who have been at some of the parishes for many years. Because as immigrants, we haven't been established in a community for many years. But first generation, second generation, third and fourth generation, you're starting to get more consistent family lines now established in a parish. So outreaching to first and second generations Hispanic, I think, is a new gap to bridge. It's there's still a huge population of immigrants coming in, but there's also a lot of young professionals that are now being raised that are Hispanic descent. And I feel that they feel kind of disconnected from the community of the church.
Why?
I think there's different reasons. I think one of the reasons is there's just not much going on in the church for them to get involved in.
Mm-hmm.
I think even just on a very practical level, I think that they don't feel like they can be included into something. I think another thing too is maybe that they,
Now, at any point, did you feel that way?
I did. Very
Why?
much so.
What was your experience? Why did you feel not connected?
I think,
And,
well,
and how does this relate to culture as opposed to just age and development?
right. Well, and I think one of the things that I was more fortunate than others in the regards that my parents were very active in the church.
Mm-hmm.
They were a big part of the charismatic movement for several years.
Yes.
And so I was always at the church, willingly or unwillingly
Right,
sometimes, right? But I was always there. But even then, I felt like my friend group and stuff, even the ones that were Catholic, when we would go to school, we wouldn't interconnect about our faith. We wouldn't talk anything about it. It was just on Sundays for that small amount of time, and outside of that, we didn't talk about it. No matter if we played soccer, no matter if we played video games, nothing. It's like we didn't have a connection between our faith and our daily lives.
Okay, so I have a question. Right.
Yeah.
So, did you feel growing up as a Mexican American that the Hispanic side of your identity was connected to the church in a way where your Anglo life was like the non-Catholic part of your life, and the Spanish-speaking part of your life was the Catholic part of your life?
Very much so. And I think that, unfortunately, what happens in enculturation is if you, one of the things that I see happening is, well, let's leave the Catholic Church behind because we're in America now. And in America,
It's a Protestant culture.
It's a Protestant culture. We don't do the Catholic thing. That's Mexico, old news stuff. Kind of the same thing of like, I heard for many years, many immigrants would tell their parents, would tell their kids, no, don't learn that language. We leave that language in the homeland. Learn American. Learn the cultures of America. Learn the habits and the way Americans dress. It's kind of like leave that stuff behind. And part of the thing that gets left behind is a faith.
So was your religious education in Spanish or English?
My religious education was mostly in Spanish.
Okay. Okay.
I think.
Now, looking back on it, you think that was that helpful to you? Or would it have been better to have it in English or maybe both languages?
What I was going to say is, come confirmation, I was having it in both languages.
Okay.
And I think that was very helpful. I think it was very, very helpful because at that point, even in high school or middle school, I was already, I was going to the public school where the language was English. There was no Spanish.
In the church's documents on the Catholic school, it's interesting. The church says that Catholic schools have a very different job in transmitting the faith than do, say, like parish religious education classes. And the parish, really the emphasis is on catechesis, the basic elements of the faith and the creed and the sacraments and the things we all have to know. The school is actually the institution established by the church to help the student bridge between their faith and the culture, right? And to do that, you actually have to have the language of the culture at your disposal, right? And that could be Spanish or English or both.
Right.
Like for you, culture was a variegated thing,
Yeah.
right? It was
Right.
both English and Spanish.
Right. And learning how to adjust the religious aspect of my life to the cultural aspect of my life was very difficult. I didn't feel like there was much of a connection. Now, it could have been a number of things. You mentioned age. I mean, at 12, 13, 14, 15, you're not really thinking about that. You're not really caring.
Lots of kids
Right.
have trouble connecting
Right,
their
right.
life, their school life to their
To-
faith life.
correct.
Right.
So it's not-
Language may exacerbate that problem, but
Right.
it's not unique.
Right. But I think there wasn't, it felt as if there wasn't much of an access, not even to some of my close friends, for whatever reason, I felt like there wasn't that connection. But like I said, I was more fortunate than others. So I'm speaking from the experience of a guy or of a man that's been involved in the church most of his life. There was a time where I wasn't as involved in the church, but yeah. So I was more fortunate in that regard.
So let's pick up the thread again with the vocational story.
Cool.
So you
All right.
grow up, you're on a church,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit disconnected from your daily life. What's next?
So I'm in high school. I played soccer. I did some football. I tried that. But I did focus on band in high school. So I ended up marching percussion.
Yeah.
I was on the drum line for some time.
Yeah.
And then I went to Jacksonville State University doing that very thing.
Okay.
I was in
Okay.
Jacksonville State University's marching band, and I was on the drum line there.
So the drum line are the cool kids, right?
the cool kids of the band.
Right, cool kids of the band.
Whatever
right.
that means,
Yeah.
you know, whatever that means. So I was on that, and you know, I really enjoyed it, Doctor. I mean, it was a great time. I've had a lot of great experiences. You know, I love drum corps. I love the whole, you know, indoor drum line.
You
So
still play?
I still play sometimes for fun. Me and one of my buddies from Hoover, actually, him and I will get together and just, you know, play some drums together and
Fun.
just talk about different. So, but anyway, so I get to Jacksonville, and my faith kind of, if you will, my first journey or lack thereof begins in college, because up till the end of high school, I was still relatively. I was living at home, and at our house, you practice the faith. Is what you do. Thanks be to my parents' perseverance and loyalty and faith. But when I left home, I didn't really care much for the faith. I didn't myself want to do it. So when I got to college, I joined the drum line, and I kind of just focused on that. And then I kind of built up a social life, and I joined a Greek fraternity for some time, and that just comes with its natural distinctions, if you will.
Yes.
You know, and so I was living a not so healthy lifestyle morally, even physically, really. But so I started drifting away from the church. So
Yes.
for about a year and a half, 2 years, I would say, I almost didn't go to church at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would go on Easter and Christmas maybe if my family
Yes.
was around, you know, the occasional mass, but it wasn't anything too practicing. And so there came a time where I felt that I was on the podcast, on the Logos podcast that I have. I kind of elaborate more on this. But one of the things that I saw happening within my own life is things just weren't. My grades were suffering, right, because of the social, this
Yeah.
kind of party
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle that I'd built and developed. My grades weren't doing too well. I didn't have the same relationship with my family as I once did, and that meant a lot to me. That relationship with my family and who I always spoke so highly about, and you know, who I love so dearly still. That had kind of, in a certain way, severed, not completely, but it just wasn't healthy. You know, if I was not visiting the house and going to my parents, and I wasn't part of the big moments with, you know, my siblings and stuff, because I was doing my own thing, and I didn't like that feeling. And so I noticed that I needed some kind of change in my life, and one of the things that I was lacking, and I noticed immediately that I was lacking in the most, was discipline, just within my own life, waking up at a decent time, you know, going to classes, doing my work. Eating right, going back to the gym, these kinds of things. But I also noticed that I wasn't like nourishing my mind. I wasn't reading anything. I wasn't really trying in my studies. In high school, I did okay, you know, and I didn't have to really try much or study, you know, outside of the class time. And when I got to college, same thing. I kind of just went through the motions, did okay in my classes. Wasn't doing the best, but didn't do terrible. You know, didn't completely fail out. But I noticed that I was desiring more than just my basics of college, or just, you know, I got a marketing degree. I got a degree in marketing, and I did some computer science stuff as well. And that wasn't all I wanted to do. I wanted more, and I didn't know what exactly I wanted until one day I walked into, this was closer to the end of my sophomore year in college, into a Western Civ class. And there's a professor there who I think is Catholic. I never asked him, but I think he was. He was a history professor there. And he starts talking about Aristotle's four causes. Now, why he talks about Aristotle's four causes in a Western Civ class in a secular university, I don't know. Because he didn't.
When I taught Western Civ, I talked about Aristotle's
Right,
four
well, thanks be
causes.
to God. Well, I didn't expect that, you know.
Yeah.
I thought I would get.
But I was dangerously close to becoming a Catholic at that point.
Well, there
too,
we go.
You know, there
No,
you go.
yeah, well, yeah. If you're talking about Aristotle's four causes, you're pretty close. But I get there.
You know Alice von Hildebrand, just to cut you off for a
Yes,
second.
yes.
All right, have you read her book? The
Art of Living.
no, it's it's her memoir about basically like her failed academic life.
Oh,
You know, I can't think of the title, but it's all about how she was a failed academic because she never achieved like the kind of notoriety that you would.
yeah.
And it was her Catholic faith that held her back because her colleagues basically marginalized her because they knew she was devout. But one of the reasons they did that is she taught ancient philosophy, and all she did was teach Plato and Aristotle. Wow. And she never introduced Catholicism. She didn't introduce, you know, Christian theism, and she wasn't proselytizing. But just unfolding the riches of Plato's philosophy, inevitably she had a lot of kids become Catholic every year. So the faculty was
Yeah.
convinced she was in there proselytizing, but she was just getting them to read the Republic.
Yeah, well, there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, metaphysics and the physics. I mean, those great texts in Western civilization and of the church too.
All right, so you learn about this stuff and it turns
Right.
you on.
And it turned me on, and it sparked something in me that I didn't, at least consciously.
Memoir of a Happy Failure. That was the name of the book.
Memoir of a Happy
Yeah.
Failure.
All right,
Here we
go ahead.
for everybody, for myself too. I'll write it down. But I was in class, and it sparked something in me. And all this time, see, from a very young age, I always had an artistic aspect to me. I loved computers. I loved art. I loved music. And as you say, in middle school and in band, I was involved in music. And I get to college, and I'm still in music, and I love music. And I become the social chair of the fraternity. So I'm orchestrating the stuff and making it look good, and choosing the music and all this stuff. And not the happiest accomplishment of my life, but I always had that artistic desire. Mm-hmm. I always did. I love poetry, and I picked up reading. So when I was in that classroom, I was like, I want more of this. Whatever, I don't know what this is. It was philosophy, of course.
Yes.
But I want more of this. Whatever this is, I want more of. Because this is much more purposeful and meaningful than anything that up to that point in my academic life I had done. And so it ignited an intellectual conversion, because all of a sudden I called my brother after class.
Now, I completely relate to you 100%,
Yeah.
okay? But I know there are a lot of people, members of my own family, in fact, that if I said, what really turned me on in life, I need more of this, I need meaning, right, is some Greek that lived 2,300 years ago who wrote about, the metaphysics of causation. So you want to give me 2 seconds on, so how could something so seemingly abstract fire your imagination and propel your life forward? I get it, but put that in words for the non-philosopher out there.
So one of the reasons I guess I connected immediately with that is because I remembered at my parish priest's back home in Fort Payne, I remember seeing Aristotle on his library. Mm-hmm. He had several other texts. He had a huge library. It was nice library. And I remember seeing that book specifically from a young age. And there was something in him teaching that to me that connected me back with my faith almost instantly. Just something as simple as knowing that book. It was really the grace of God. But so it kind of...
Okay, so you were, somebody explained Aristotle to you in a way where you saw this man had insight and wisdom.
Right.
And you had some personal connections and memories that said, my faith embraces this.
Yeah, my faith embraces it.
This connects back to my faith. Okay, now that makes a lot of sense.
And who I am.
Yeah.
As a beloved child of Jesus Christ. And I think,
Now,
church says, in that it is, to the measure that it is good, true, and beautiful, in there lies Christ.
Okay.
And I think that when I experienced such a, even now that I think back, pretty basic philosophical kind of outlining, grounding, I was so drawn to that because I was like, wow, this is, where's this been all my life, And I don't know,
and I know you're into Augustine, and Augustine had a period in his life when he picked up the Hortensius by Cicero, and had a similar sort of philosophical awakening to the pursuit of truth and beauty, and it didn't lead him immediately to the Catholic faith, but it started him on the trajectory that led him ultimately into Catholicism. Now, there was something else. I know I listened to your vocation story in your podcast, and you mentioned, a friend kind of called you to yourself, right? You want to say something about that?
Yeah, so he just challenged me. It wasn't nothing big, it was just very simply kind of like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing, kind of thing. And I remember we were talking about something, I can't remember exactly what, but we were talking about something, and he had mentioned that, just like I said, I made a comment or something, or I was saying something about something, and he goes, well, what are you doing, kind of thing, what are you doing? Why don't you, he would come to my dorm room, or I guess my room at the fraternity house, and he would knock on my door sometimes and ask me to mass, and I wasn't going to mass at the time, and then during my reconversion, he stopped going, but before then, it was kind of him that kind of made me think, maybe I need to go back to church, maybe I need to live out my faith a little more, maybe I need to try to just fix, discipline my life a little bit more. And so it wasn't, that big of a deal, but it was just a simple kind of question. What are you doing? To me, it was a big deal because I didn't have a community of people that were challenging me or
Yeah.
propelling me to move forward in
Yeah.
my life and to not settle for, the obstacles that were hindering me at that point.
Okay, so that's important.
It
Okay,
is
so
important.
so you have a friend challenge you. You get turned on to philosophy. What's next?
So I get turned to philosophy, and then I call my brother. Right?
Okay.
And I call my brother, and my brother and sister both went to St. Bernard Preparatory School.
Yep.
And so it's ran by Benedictine monks.
Yep.
And the reason I call my brother is because I know he had had exposure to philosophy and some theology in his studies as a high schooler. So I was like, well, I don't know much, but I do know that he is an ancient philosopher, and my brother has studied philosophy. So there we go again. It makes another connection with somebody that I love, which is my brother.
Yes.
And so I call my brother. I'm like, look, man, we read this in class. I don't know what's happening. I want more of this. Do you think I should pick him up? Is there somebody else you recommend? What do you think I should do about this? It's funny because he was at the time a 15-year-old, about to be a 16-year-old. This is, And
So he was still at St. Bernard's.
He was still at St. Bernard at the time. And I call him, and he basically tells me, no, you don't pick him up. You wouldn't understand him. It's basically the gist of what he was telling me. But what he really said is, I don't think you need to read him until you read other texts that are not just strictly philosophical. That I think that would give you a better rounding of theology and philosophy kind of mixed together. And so he said, but I got a soccer game. I'll call you later. I was like, all right, cool. So he called me back and he said, hey, I got a recommendation for you, The Confessions by St. Augustine.
Best thing he could have suggested to you.
And well, later on I found out that actually it came from a monk that told him to tell me.
Best thing
Right.
he could have suggested.
So, right. And so I was like, all right, cool. And then I saw the book, and I think it's pretty big. And I was like, I don't know if I can handle this, brother. I haven't read a book in many years, and nothing like this. I jokingly say the last book I had read before the Confessions was Junie B. Jones. You've heard of these books? Yeah. So I jokingly say that. So anyway, so I pick up this text, and man, the conversion really began. It's like St. Augustine knew the depths of my heart, and he knew my desire, and I didn't even know my desire. And so Christ used him in a very intimate way. Because the thing I wanted most when I was reading that text, there's many, many parts of that book that stood out with me, and I've read it multiple times since. But the thing that impressed me most was the way his relationship, his level of intimacy with Christ. All my life I had heard Christ, Christ is, God is Father, you're his adopted Son. Jesus Christ wants you to be close to him, wants you to love him, he wants to love you. But I didn't know what that kind of meant. But this book, the way he was writing was so honest that it drew me into the depths of even his own heart, I would say. It kind of showed me that it's possible to have an intimacy with Christ that is beyond anything I'd experienced in my life before. Even with former relationships with girlfriends that I had, or even with my own parents, in that text, like his level of sincerity, of honesty, of wrestling with himself was on full display, and it was one of the greatest texts in Western civilization. And so when I read that book, I love the sincerity, and now that I know it's a book written in the form of a prayer. It's basically one huge prayer, And so I started picking up that book, and that book slowly took me to kind of pray on my own. I would read a few chapters or a chapter and just kind of sit, think about it, meditate a little bit, pray a little bit. And then eventually it took me even to the chapel, the moment of silence.
Oh, you're nearly giving me goosebumps here. This is good stuff.
It moved me to the chapel, and there was our blessed Lord. And a lot of the things he was wrestling with, I was wrestling with almost at the same time, I was like, God, what about this? And kind of angry, and God, show me it really was. I would say it was a very sincere dialogue between God and I. Those times I was going to the chapels, it was a very moment of growing in intimacy with Christ, and I didn't even know it. I thought I was going there to argue with God and to fight with him, but I wasn't. I was actually growing with him. It reminds me of a story I once heard of a nun who was taking care of some patients at a hospital, and the husband passes away of this couple, and the woman leaves, and she's mad at God, and she's frustrated that God would take her husband. Well, she goes out to the statue of Jesus and starts punching it, spitting on it, and one of the security guards is running at her to stop her, and the nun tells the guard, no, she's praying.
Yes. Yes.
And it was that kind of imagery.
My favorite psalm now is Psalm 88.
Oh yeah?
And the reason why is Psalm 88
Yeah.
is the most despairing, hateful psalm in the entire Psalter. And the psalmist says, God, you've taken away all my friends. Your terror washes over me, and my one companion is darkness. Amen. That's it. That's the whole verse. It's just a complaint.
Yeah.
But what makes that so wonderful to me
Yeah.
is it's articulated as a prayer, right? Rather than
Right.
walking away from the faith, the psalmist just rails at God, because that's where he's going to find the resolution to his problem,
Right.
right?
Well,
and so it's
yeah.
canonized, it's inspired, and it goes into the canon of the Bible
Yeah.
to say this is a valid way
Yeah.
of engaging. Israel means he wrestles with God.
Wrestling with God. That's right. Yeah. And one of the first acts of prayer, right? Vulnerability.
That's a great story, though, about the
Yeah.
nun letting her beat up the.
That's kind of the way
statue of
I can
Jesus.
think about it in my head, because that's what was
fabulous.
happening.
That's great.
And so anyway, so that happens, and I start. And so anyways, so the parish priest comes into my life at that time, Father Jim Handerhan. Great example of a man, great example of a priest. He was a short-lived priest. He didn't live as priesthood too long. I think it was 3, maybe 4 years, but I think it was 3 years. And so basically, those 2 or 3 years he was at Jacksonville, St. Charles, I was there. So he was basically there when I was there. And so he notices that I'm going to the chapel by myself, and I'm praying the rosary by myself, and I'm walking around the church sometimes and going through the little library that they had at the church. I asked him if I could go through it and pick out a couple books, He starts noticing that I'm sticking around. I'm actually going to some events and stuff. Well, he says, hey, Max, why don't you and I meet personally? Maybe once a month, maybe twice a month if you want. I'm like, all right, why not? What do I have to lose, What do I have to lose? I'm not doing much else, Some of my friends are noticing my reconversion. Some love it, some hate it. It's kind of how it happens. Some are growing closer to me, and some I'm sure have their maybe even rightful judgments of me, right? And so I needed a friend. I needed somebody to guide me, and I knew the priest could do that, because the priest was a big part of my family's life. The priest was a big part of many people's lives that I knew that he had impacted. The priesthood is where Jesus Christ oftentimes shows his love and mercy for the people of God. And so I was like, maybe the priest can help me in some way, At the very least, I can tell him why I doubt, God would love me or could love me. And so I started meeting with him, and so he became my vis-a-vis spiritual director, And so for about a year, this was constant. So this is my junior year. He was, involved a lot in my life, and I started attending Mass regularly, and I was trying to fix some of my, former habits and stuff. Trying to, rescue some friendships and letting some go. That's part of the reconversion too, And so that started happening, and slowly my life began to kind of turn around. And I wanted to go to church. I wanted to read. I wanted to pray. I wanted to pray my rosary, but I always had this desire. Ever since I was a young kid, I was motivated by the desire to bring people to Christ, and I didn't even know it. See, because from a young age, one of the reasons I was driven to the artistic aspect is to show people the beauty of God, and I didn't even know it. I didn't even know it, but when I got to the university, one of the reasons I chose a marketing major, well, actually I started as a computer science major, and I started as a computer science major in order that I can develop church websites. Like, that was literally my driving force. I was like, I want to better, church websites and design graphics and help out, the parishes in our local diocese. But then it switched to marketing. Well, the reason it switched to marketing is because I wanted to somehow outreach. I wanted to evangelize, right? That was really my driving force. What did I want to market? I wanted to sell the church, if you will, to the people of God in a certain way, and to the people who don't know God. And so I always had this desire. And so when I started meeting with my spiritual director, Father Jim Handerhan, they started kind of coming out, because my relationship with Christ didn't stay there. I noticed that I didn't just want to go and pray. I wanted to live this out. I had this zeal in me building up, and I wanted to show people about it. I wanted to express to people the message of God, how wonderful the sacraments are, how wonderful the sacrament of confession is. It's not a burden. It's not, a hindrance to your freedom. It's an act of love. It's established for love, by love. And so I had this desire to express, and I wanted to bring people to now the Blessed Sacrament, right? The expose Blessed Sacrament to adoration, and show my friends that, show them the message that I've encountered Christ in a way that's profoundly, reshaping who I am, reshaped who I am and how I think and how I want to live my life. And sure, I've had my failures. I am no perfect man. I will, admit that to anybody. But I think that as Father Jim was helping me, teaching me to really pray, just even the basics of the spiritual life. Go to Mass again, very simply. Wake up on time, Max. Make sure you're exercising. Hey, I need your help in the lawn this weekend. Can you come help me? Sure, Father, kind of thing. I started experiencing the love of God in a very ordinary way, if you will. I didn't have to have some crazy extraordinary experience. I started recognizing God in the little things of life. And so he asked me at the end, closer to the end of my junior year, I think it was mid-junior year, if I'd consider the priesthood. And I said, absolutely not. Thank you. Next time, maybe. But I couldn't help but bring it to prayer. I was like, what was that question about, God? I don't even know what that's about. Anyways, I got this girl that I want to talk to. In my prayers, right? This is me talking in prayers. And it would not leave. I would go to Mass, and I would go, and I was like, man, what is going on here? So I went to a diocesan seminary event, and I came back home. I wasn't at peace with it at all. So I was like, maybe this priesthood thing isn't for me. So then I went to the Father. He's like, Max, pray about it. Don't make your decision based off of one event. Keep praying about it, See what God wants for your life. So then I was invited to live in at the Pontifical College Josephenum, and I stayed there for a weekend, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever done in my life. It could have been the institution itself, but I think what I noticed in that stay was that the presence of God, that desire that I'd had to want to teach people about God and to want to bring people to God, is really kind of starts here. It's one of my first times, and I don't want to limit it strictly to this, but it was one of my first times in my life that I experienced a very beautiful liturgy. I literally had never up to that point experienced like a really beautiful liturgy. And that was the first time I did, and I was as I jokingly say, I was shooketh. I was shooketh to the core. I was really moved. It was beautiful all around, and I couldn't help but think, God, is this a place for me? And I remember that night I was praying at midnight at one of the side chapels, or one of the chapels they have, smaller chapels, St. Rose of Lima Chapel, and I was doing my holy hour at the chapel, and I told God I wanted to go in the middle of the night and just sit with Him. And the overwhelming peace that I got in that place was just, I can't describe it, Doctor. I was like, I need to be here.
So that's when you made the decision?
That's when I made the decision. That's when I made the decision. I need to consider this decision seriously. And it's still a few weeks before I decided, but that's where it really, that's where the seed was really planted. And I remember the exact moment.
So I want to back up now, and I want to recapitulate.
Okay.
Right? Because it seems to me that you had a number of elements that converged to nurture you in your sense of vocation.
Sure.
I mean, I was taking some notes, and I said practically a tsunami of positive forces, right, that were converging on your life. And while these were important in your vocation, the priesthood, these same elements, I think, are crucial really to cultivating any vocation, right? So, and here they are, right? This is the way I see what you just told me. So number one, you had something of a kind of a personal meaning crisis, an emptiness, a hollowness that you needed to fill. And
restlessness.
You were restlessness, and you were, kind of tempted to run off down some bad roads like we all are, right? You had a friend who challenged you to live more authentically.
Sure did.
You had, your family was a source of real support and encouragement. You had an intellectual conversion, first to philosophy, then to Augustine. You began spending time in the chapel in front of the Blessed Sacrament and prayer, and you had a really powerful experience of pastoral accompaniment from a priest who encouraged your spiritual life and your vocation, right?
Amen.
So this question occurs to me. What would you say to this? Your job as a priest is going to be to cultivate and nurture each of these distinct elements in your parishioners to help them live their vocations. What do you think about that as a challenge?
Well, I think that we encounter Christ in many different ways.
Yeah.
And I sure did in my own, tsunami of experiences.
Sure.
And I'm still 24 years old, so I'm sure I'm going to encounter Christ in many more experiences. And I think that we need to be able to allow, God willing, if God does will me to be a priest, and I do become a priest, I hope to enable people to meet Christ in any setting that they're in. It's one of the reasons that I look up to Jose Maria Escriva, Saint Jose Maria Escriva, because he recognizes that we experience Christ in the ordinariness of existence. And I think that oftentimes we limit ourselves, honestly, to want to experience Christ in this huge, big, revelation. But oftentimes that's not how God works, right? Oftentimes God works where we say grace perfects nature, right? And so we oftentimes move beyond like the natural, as if we don't want anything to do with this. We're Christian, we're beyond this. We're Catholic, we're beyond this, I hope to, in the little ways I can, and accompany people. I oftentimes think like accompany people at their high school graduation, accompany people at their soccer game or football game, or accompany people in a moment of death and sorrow, accompanying people at whatever recital or whatever dinner, because I think people need the example of Christ in their own lives, and I think that the priest can bring that in different scenarios.
The reason I put the question the way I did is that I'm a student of Pope Francis. I've read Evangelii Gaudium many times. I've studied elements over and over again. I think he has a lot of insight. And almost every one of the things that you said brought you to vocation is something that the Pope points out specifically as these are distinct elements in living the vocation to missionary discipleship. He talks about, of course, the role of accompaniment is just so dear to the mind of the Pope, right? You have to actually walk with people, be with them. He talks about developing a contemplative and a prayer life in one's relationship with Christ. He talks about the challenge of a kind of apologetics that would engage faith and reason in a dialogue. He talks about the support of families. And clearly, the whole exhortation that he writes is about the challenge to live a more authentic Catholic existence, more true to ourselves. So I'm gonna share a passage from Pope Francis and see if you would comment on this for me in light of that conversation. Okay. Pope, the context of the remark is he says that there are people that are being drawn away from the church, and sometimes to more pathological forms of religion or ideology, right? And he identifies a problem of baptized people who lack a sense of belonging to the church. And he says sometimes this is due to certain structures and occasionally an unwelcoming atmosphere of some of our parishes or communities, or a bureaucratic way of dealing with problems, be they simple or complex. In many places, an administrative approach prevails over a pastoral approach, as does a concentration on administering the sacraments apart from other forms of evangelization.
I mean, can I really add to the quote of Pope, kind of thing? I really don't have much to say to that. I think over.
That's not your experience. No. What he describes is not your experience, right?
Yeah.
But I can see how, if that was someone's experience, think about all the elements of your own vocation that would have been lacking. If someone hadn't been there to accompany you. Yeah. If you hadn't had your intellect challenged, right, in a classroom, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you hadn't had a friend to admonish you.
I think we know that community is important. Okay. The Trinitarian relationship is in community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? And so that's how we work with people, and to love Christ is to love other people, and I think love is yes, but love also can sometimes mean no. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It comes with acceptance, but also comes with denials and rejection sometimes. And I think that I recently listened to an interview with Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson.
I've listened to both of those.
Okay.
The second one was great. The first one, not so great.
Okay. So one of the things that was asked, and I think it was actually asked in both of them, was asked from Bishop Barron to Dr. Peterson, what is one thing you think the church could do better about? And I think the answer was, I don't think you challenge your people enough. Basically stating that if the gospel is true, if Jesus Christ is real, then the demands on your people should be much grander than what they are. Should be much larger to what they are. And it's true, right? Christ came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And I think that one of the reasons maybe I experienced life in all these aspects is because that's where I was, that's who I am in a lot of ways, and that because of those experiences, I encountered Christ, and life has become more abundantly through those ways. And I think that that challenging people kind of helps foster that. It helps draw people to what they're called to, right? We're not called to settle for going to purgatory. We're called to be saints.
Right.
And and we're called to be saints and to love anything and everything that we do, and it's very difficult. That's why prayer is so important. That's why grace is so important, because it kind of keeps us, it propels us forward in trying to live and encounter Christ.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot to something else briefly for a minute. All right.
Do it.
So it wasn't the only element, but being at a secular university in a Western Civ class was an occasion for you to encounter the Catholic faith.
It was one.
Ironically, I think my first intellectual encounter with Catholicism was in high school.
Yeah.
I was in a secular high school. There were no Catholic presence that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I was in a class where there was certainly no love for the Catholic Church in the class. And I read a book that is not favorable towards Catholicism. It's The Portrait of an Artist of the Young Man by James Joyce, right?
Yeah,
So, Joyce is apostate. He left the church, right?
Okay.
But he knew it well. And there was a disparaging description of the Catholic priesthood in the book, where a priest character challenges the protagonist, Stephen Dedalus, to consider a vocation to the priesthood, right? And his motive is really ugly, right? It's the power that he would have over people because of his ability to confect the Eucharist, right? And so it's Joyce's perspective on that is that this is a manipulative and kind of exploitive reason to want to be called the priesthood. But as a young Protestant kid reading this book, it was the first time I ever really confronted how amazing the doctrine of the real presence was.
Wow.
And so
Joyce
Joyce's attitude was not at all favorable to Catholicism, but when I read that one, he's right. If a priest really has the power to confect the Eucharist, and that really is the body and blood of Christ, what an amazing thing that would be.
Yeah.
I encountered the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist as a existentially overpowering idea for the first time in a deeply anti-Catholic novel in an anti-Catholic context, and I saw it as something like challenging and to be considered. I know that. So the classroom. The point of this is that the classroom and encountering Catholic culture is a point of contact for many people. Some of us, the first time ever. With this magnificent thing called the Catholic Church, right? I know that something you're doing now, in your summer studies as a seminarian, is you're trying to bring something of Catholic culture to the parishes that you're working in. And obviously this is an important part of your self-conception, what you have to offer people. You want to talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in adult ed in your parish?
Okay, yeah. So recently in my life, I've picked up, not that recent, I guess. One of the philosophers that's been most influential in my philosophical formation, if you will, has been Joseph Pieper.
Yeah.
Right, German philosopher.
I like Joseph Pieper.
Joseph Pieper is a man. He actually, some of his books weren't even released, well, at least translated into English that even that long ago. I think it was like the early 90s even.
Yeah.
But one of the books that I've heavily relied on has been Leisure, the Basis of Culture.
Yes, that's a great book.
We're talking about culture, we're talking about community, and it's provocative even of the title itself. Another book that I have been really focusing on and just in general has been part of like my spiritual development or attempt at a spiritual development is the Noonday Devil.
Yes.
By brother, I guess it would be, or father, Jean Charles Nault. And the book focuses on acedia. Right?
Yes.
Right.
You want to define that for people?
Acedia, yeah, so sloth, right? So acedia is the Latin word for sloth, and Acadia is where it comes from in the Greek version. So Acadia, whatever. Okay. So these two books in my, they've really been helpful in a lot of ways in my spiritual life and even my, like I said, philosophical formation. They kind of came organically. When I got to the parish this summer, I've always had this desire, as I stated earlier, to kind of bring people to this encounter with how beautiful the church is, the tradition of the church, both, like her intellectual aspect as well as her spiritual and her practicality even in our daily lives. And so I asked Father, Father, what would you like me to do at the parish? And he said, well, this and that. And I was like, well, Father, what do you think about some talks? Could I give some talks maybe that help me? It's not a homily because I'm not there yet, but it's stuff that I love. It's stuff that I enjoy, and I'm reading a significant amount. And I'm getting tired of just keeping it to myself.
You got to talk about it.
I got to do it.
You got to talk about it.
Yeah.
Crank up a podcast.
And so one of the first things that's actually really interesting, when I entered the rectory, I told him what was one of my favorite philosophers when we were just in conversation, Father and I, and I was like, yeah, Joseph Pieper. He goes, let me show you something. He opened up his cabinet and he had several Joseph Pieper books. He's like, I love Joseph Pieper too. I'm like, oh, we're going to get along. This is great. So anyways, we start talking about, and one of the things he proposed, because I think he himself noticed the importance of this book, The Noonday Devil, he's like, why don't you give a talk on acedia, what it means, some of its implications, how it's affecting us, maybe the origin, of this capital sin. And so I gave a talk a few weeks ago on that. You can go on the podcast at Logos on Apple, Google, and Spotify if you want to check that out. But I gave a talk on that, kind of showing people some of the intellectual tradition of the church and some of the spiritual implications that this.
Okay, so briefly, and
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far off the field here, but hey, Max,
Okay.
I'm not hurting anybody,
Okay.
right? How can how can sloth be a capital sin? Because I'm not hurting anybody.
Right.
I'm just playing Xbox, man.
Okay, so I'll give you 3 definitions of acedia really
All right.
quickly. All right. One is a sorrow for a spiritual good.
Okay.
Okay, that's St. Thomas Aquinas' definition. Another one is a lack of desire. Okay, and the third one that I gave was a disgust with activity. So for the first one, sorrow about a spiritual good or for a spiritual good. You may not be hurting anyone, but you're hurting yourself.
Bingo.
Okay, spiritual depression. That's what I would call it.
Yeah.
You're hurting yourself. You're damaging yourself slowly. You're not living.
Hey, I don't have a right to hurt myself?
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Well, in the true sense of the term, no, you don't.
You're right. I
Okay.
don't.
And so the second definition I gave was what was it?
Let's see.
A lack of care. Lack of desire,
yeah.
lack of care. Okay. This actually does affect other people, because the way you live and the way you live life impacts other people. And so if you don't actually care about existence, if you don't care about the things you do, then you actually do impact other people, because other people look up to you in a lot of ways, whether you know it or not. You either have family members that look up to you, you have coworkers, friends look up to you. And so when you don't have a care in what you do, they also aren't called to be who they are.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're having to settle for a lower form of dignity than they're given. They're much more, they're made in the image and likeness of Christ, right? And so again, I go back to Christ came that we might have life abundantly, and when you don't care about what you do, you're not actually embracing that truth.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
so the
Christ
last
calls us to be a light bulb,
Right.
Not a rock or
Not
an
a rock,
island,
right.
a la Paul Simon.
Yeah, so a lack of desire. And lastly, disgust with activity. You actually are hurting people
Yeah.
when you hate, because what starts to happen with acedia is it infests your life in such a way that you judge everybody else's activity, and you yourself don't do anything because you're so busy judging other people's activity.
What a great point.
You know what I
What a
mean?
great point. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you actually are affecting other people, because not only are you judging their movement, the people who are around you are hearing you judge them, and so they want to judge that person or this activity or this event or this whatever. So you are actually directly or indirectly affecting other person's life.
Fantastic.
So I would say, summatively, those would be 3 of my responses.
Awesome. Well, Max,
Yeah.
we have we are not slow to do good activity in this podcast. In fact, I think we've been going 45 minutes,
That's
and it's
good.
probably taxing most people's patience at this
Yeah,
point.
well,
So I think
I
we might shut it
understand
down.
it.
But
Sounds
this is
good,
great,
man.
and we're all excited for your vocation and for your priesthood, and I hope you'll give us many, many more talks about Exadia and Joseph Pieper and everything else that you're learning, and keep on doing that accompaniment. And God bless you.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor.
So thanks for being with us. So again, it's Living Catholic, podcast of the Diocese of Birmingham. You can tune in every week, and I think we're going to try to crank back up into the weekly podcast.
Let's do
on
it.
Thursday.
Yeah.
So you can recommend us on all of your various podcast apps that you listen to. Give us a thumbs up or a positive or a like or whatever it is, and
Cool.
and pass it around to your friends.
you.
So thanks for listening.
All right, thank you.